Hey guys, and welcome back to a slightly different video this time, where I am going to be answering the questions y'all have so generously asked in the Discord. Most of them happen to be related to AE2, however there are a few general questions out there and I feel like just answering them separately might be a great idea, so this video was born. The first question is from Reborn, who asks, how do you connect a P2P to a controller, and why do you do it like that? I can only imagine that they're talking about these P2P tunnels right here and why I would like y'all to always connect these as the inputs and wherever you end up using them as outputs. So why don't we just start with the scale model? We have our main controller and it's somehow receiving power. It has a P2P connected to its face that ends up in a subcontroller. And then the subcontroller somehow provides channels to other P2Ps down the line. Let's just say it's to an ME drive. Now this device is offline because this controller is offline. Let's bring the subcontroller online, and then using the memory card you can link the two P2P tunnels together. But let's say I do it backwards. Let's say I make this the input side and I make this the output side, so output side on the controller. Now in the future, of course this is now online. This now has the ME drive as a part of its network. Both of these can see each other and talk to each other. That's no problem at all. The problem arises when you're further down the line and building something new. You're, I don't know, 200 blocks out and you want to put down a fresh P2P. And of course, this is only using one of the 32 available channels on that P2P, right? If I go walk up over here, it says carry channels 1. I'll highlight that in the edit. And if I wish to use more of these, let's say I have more drives in some farm, let's say 4 of them, I would like to go to, well, the central point of my network to copy it, but this is an output side. Now watch closely to what happens if I shift right click the output side. I shift, right click, and would you look at that, it got reassigned. I can only copy addresses, or I can only create memory configurations from input sides. So this is the input side. If I shift right click this, you can see that the colors now match. And if I go back and right click this, you can see that they're now both linked. However, if I go back to the output side and shift right click, I end up creating a new device configuration. So I would like to have all of the downstream P2Ps be outputs and the original one be the input, so that when you are building out into the distance and creating a brand new connection, it's always easier to come back here, shift right click this to copy it, and right click to paste. You know, instead of having to look around to where you ended up putting this input side, because if it's on some random drive or some random, I don't know, farm somewhere, you're gonna have a nightmare trying to track this down. This, however, is always connected to whichever controller design you go with, because I've seen some of y'all make wacky, like partial controllers and stuff. Do whatever you want. But like, just remember, keep those accessible. Those are slightly important. The second half of Reborn's question happens to be, why do you guys have tons of wireless connectors? And once again, I can only imagine they're talking about stuff like that. Or, for example, my AE2 monstrosity of a room that I've constructed in episode 9, where I make a big controller, a bigger room, and twinkly lights. And that is simply because of channel distribution. And you know what? I can probably really easily borrow this wireless connector right here. It's transmitting 32 channels to that guy right there. You know what? It doesn't really matter. Take a wireless connector, hook it up to your subnet controller. I'm using that controller design as a subnet controller. That's perfectly alright. What I want to do next is instead of hooking that up to that, I'm going to right click this guy, and then right click this guy. Now instead of that being connected there, it's connected here. Excellent. Now that these two are connected, this has 32 P2Ps on its network, and that is a total of 1024 channels that are available around this controller right here. Now if you're anything like me, building a base in all the mods 10, you rarely need more than 16, maybe 32 endpoints at any given place in your base for a farm. So for example, my simulation chamber setup happens to use all 32 channels because I'm using 16 import and export buses. Right? That is just one P2P tunnel. If I am to hook up a single P2P tunnel to this, I would do something like this, and then put down a P2P. Now this is limited to 8 channels, but I can always use a dense cable and then have 32 channels coming off of this. But what if I then want more channels to be further away? For example, what if I want one of these to go I don't know, over there. And then one of these is used in a different part of my base over here. And one of these is used in a different part of my base over here. And as you can see, or imagine, if each one of these is connected to its own little P2P tunnel, those three and these three, I will then need 32 of these connectors to fill up 32 channels to completely utilize these 32 P2Ps coming from the green subnet over there. Don't pay attention to the design of the controller, it's the thought that counts. And so, basically what I like to say is these wireless connectors are like the breakout board equivalent of AE2, where I had a 32 channel link and I've split it out into its 32 individual links and then used one of these at a time as and when I need them. Are there other ways to deal with this problem that include cable management? Absolutely. Are there more efficient ways to do this? 100%. This is just the way I wanted to build it, and so I did it this way. And finally, to answer the third part of Reborn's question, what do I mean by the connectors talking to each other? Well, for one, if these are completely disconnected from each other, they're all online. So hypothetically, I can take this guy and connect it here, and they're both connected to each other. That makes no sense because there's no cable behind this. However, this guy is using one channel to connect to the P2P, and well, I wonder what it's connected to. Oh, it's connected to this guy, the one below it. We never want this happening because now the one below it can only connect to 31 remaining devices. And if you want to be, well, a bit pedantic, you wouldn't want them talking to each other. You want the channels to be passed through the cable. This is unnecessary if you're completely using like a single P2P per wireless connector like I am, but for the sake of completeness, I have decided to, in my survival world, go ahead and color each one of these a different color. So I have made stripes of white and black so that the layers don't crosstalk between the different layers of the subcontrollers. I sort of hope that makes sense. Moving swiftly onwards, the next question happens to come from a fellow creator, The Matter. Matter asks how to color wireless connectors. Well, I do cover it in the main controller video, which was created all the way back there, but I'll cover it again. Well, first of all, you're going to have to make yourself a color applicator. The recipe is fairly easy. The next thing you're going to need is an ME chest, and fortunately I have the luxury of creative mode, but the recipe once again is just copper and a terminal. Not too bad. Click and drag myself one of these. It'll need some power, so I put this down here. And then you use the color applicator as a drive or as a storage cell. Put it in the storage cell slot, and then you can access its interface or its inventory. Then you can select dyes of your choosing. Let's just say I want to load this up with, let's just say a couple stacks of black dye. So just load up some black dye in here and I can pull my color applicator back out. Now obviously I won't be able to swap between colors because the only dye I have is black. You can then walk up to any old device and shift right click it to change its color. Now you want to color devices separately because, well, separately colored devices don't communicate with each other. It's just that simple. Best example right here, the purple cable isn't talking to the green connector. They're not connected. Similarly, if I am to go ahead and color this cable black, it disconnects itself from the rest of the network. And to put it simply, that's pretty much it. You want to color things differently to make sure they don't crosstalk. You keep your modes of communication separated, and that ensures these 32 channels don't end up interfering with those 32 channels from the purple one, or these 32 channels don't end up also in the purple one. It's just that simple. Alright, next question, also from The Matter. What are subnets? How are they useful? And this is a question that's been asked repeatedly, so I'll just answer it once and for all. Put it simply, any network that doesn't share channels with your main network but shares resources across them is a subnetwork. In this example, that happens to be an example of a subnet, even though it has a controller. That is a subnet controller, and it handles the green subnet. These only exchange channels, and these channels are different from the channels in the main controller, as I've shown earlier. However, without the existence of the green subnetwork, the main controller cannot do what it's supposed to do. So that's an example of a subnetwork. Another example would be, I guess, I can set one up right now, and that's why I have resources in my hotbar here. Let's say you have a furnace system or a smelting system that's supposed to be making cobblestone into smooth stone. So you have one of these drives, it's in your main network storage, so let's just connect it up to your main controller here. And you know what, for the sake of the argument, let's just say that you have, or you want infinite stone because you have a really stone intensive farming setup going. This is going to simulate that. All of your stone is going into a farm, you have raw cobblestone as an infinite thing, and now you want to set up some furnaces that can constantly smelt your stone. And setting up something like this would be the most intuitive thing to do, because obviously you want to take some cobblestone and you want to send it up and over. So you would take your cobblestone, put it in here, and then this stuff would end up in here, assuming you have power to all of these and stuff. You would then pull the cobblestone out the bottom and you would get regular old smooth stone that would end up in here. And after a little bit of setup, I can say something like this, where all of your furnaces are active and they're all sort of doing something. I can even turn on auto sort and then have these go do things in parallel. And I will constantly be building up stone, and all the stone's getting trashed. Right, that makes sense. Something like that needs automation every now and again. But check out what you've done. You've used 6 channels to do something that is just one task, and that is smelt stone. Basically, instead of having 3 imports and 3 exports, what you're going to end up doing is have no imports, no exports from the main network. Instead, you're going to have an interface that's going to request cobblestone. Let's just say it's going to request 64 cobblestone. Now, for all intents and purposes, this slot is available for storage to read from. What I mean by that is if I am to now put a storage bus on top of this guy and then connect up more exporters like this, these extended export buses would be able to pull cobblestone out of this slot over here and give it to the smelter for smelting. Like that. Now, this doesn't work because it doesn't have power. So you would use one of the good old quartz fibers. No, I think I'm just gonna whack this guy down here, or maybe actually behind for this guy. Let's just put this guy behind here and hook these up like that. Just so this guy gets power, but doesn't actually exchange channels. That's what the quartz fiber does. Now, you can see that every now and again, as the exporters come up to speed, this is gonna get cobblestone. It's pulling it out of the storage bus. Now I would like this cobblestone to be pulled out and pushed back into this interface as well, because I would like to return the stone to the system. That can once again be achieved using a few more interfaces. As long as these have auto output turned on, I should be able to put all of these interfaces down here like so, and have these furnaces send all of their stone out into the system. And now, as you can see, a bunch of stone just flooded in and then flooded out. However, I am once again using 3 channels where I can technically use 0. If I do this, this is now a subnet, and so is this guy. Both of these arms end up using 4 channels, 1 for the storage bus, 3 for the exporters, and in this case, 3 for the interfaces, and 1 for the storage bus. Once again, however, this will need quartz fibers, so we do that. And once everything's back online, all of the cobblestone will be smelted into stone. The stone will end up in these faces here. So if I put something down here, it will end up in this interface. Currently there's nowhere for this to go, so it just waits there. Yeah, that's where subnets are useful. Technically, I've used just 1 channel. That's what's neat about subnets. I just used 1 channel to connect 3 machines, technically 6 inputs and outputs combined, into a single channel. That's exactly what subnets are useful for. And as always, there's the A2 mechanics section, which details all of the different types of subnets, their requirements, and how to build them. A bunch of stuff you can read and study. But that's how I have found the most use for subnets. I will not be breaking these because they keep making noise. Alright, our next question comes from Febreze419, who asks, how did I manage to do the crafting subnets in episode 6 of my ATM 10 Survival series? So let's set up something similar over here. I will have this gold barrel be my stand-in for an infinite supply of gold essence. Let's just assume it's hooked up to some really nice fast farm. I would need a storage bus that is going to read this onto the subnet as something that can provide gold essence to a crafting system. I would then require some form of an exporter that would be told to craft gold ingots on demand and put them into the machine that it's connected to. In this case, it's an interface that's connected to the network, so it'll end up in storage. Currently, there's nowhere for the gold to go, so it should hypothetically end up in here once the system is in place. Next up, we use our cables to connect everything together, like that. 2 channels, which is the export bus and the storage bus. And then we give a pattern provider, a molecular assembler, and a crafting CPU of some sort to manage the crafts, because this now makes a completely autonomous auto-crafting system. All you need is a pattern that tells the system how to craft gold, and now hopefully, there you go. You're now auto-crafting gold through the requests placed by this exporter using the molecular assembler and the pattern provider. The neat part about this, and the reason I used it in episode 6, was because I had a multiple input farm and I wanted all of them to end up in the same spot. This is effectively the same design. I hope that clears it up. Next up, Argentum1079 from the Discord asks, how to use subnets to process thousands of items, meaning machines fill up evenly for maximum efficiency, for example for dark steel fermenter IO. Answering that question is a little bit convoluted, because if you really care about proper even distribution, I'd recommend using something along the lines of SFM, where you can individually control how many items end up in every single machine. Alternatively, there exists the item stocking bus, I believe it's called. Oh, what I'm on about is one of these stock export buses. These are pretty cool too. Let's just shut this off too. So in one of these, you can effectively pick out, let's say I want to put in one of these, and then you can middle click and say I want to put in 100 of these into the barrel. So using export buses filtered to the exact number of items, let's say 111 of each of the ingredients, you can make sure that if this was an alloy smelter, there'd be 1 of each ingredient in here. That's one of the ways to do it. I don't like this way. I would use SFM instead for automation, but hey, that's the beauty of a sandbox game. You get to do whatever you want. Squawky Kaka asks, how do I make my builds look pretty? Well, to be honest, the short answer is that I don't really know. I just sort of build something, and if I don't like it, I fix it. But that is a subjective answer. To objectively answer how to make something look good, I'd say try to stick to a theme. For example, my ATM 10 base is an underground base, so I'm taking a lot of liberty with leaving the roof unfinished. But if you suppose look at this block, there's a certain color palette to it. There's the white, there's the grays right here. Maybe you can incorporate some purple from the light gray here. If you look at that block, there's a little bit of blue and a light blue. And if you look here, there's an orange and there's a yellow and maybe a brown too. So if you just laid that out in blocks, this is what you end up with. Now, all of these colors happen to come from that block right there. All of those colors happen to come from there, and this edge right here. And a bunch of the blues and the purples come from the wireless connectors. And there's always other shades. For example, the blackstone here is darker than the chiseled polish variant. So if you want to create a two-tone effect, it's much nicer to have a slightly lighter block next to a darker block, and there's a little bit of contrast on that edge right there. However, I do enjoy myself a perfect flat black, and with the addition of Luminex blocks, you have the perfectly black block that has got no texture whatsoever. So play around, and you'll eventually settle on something you like to build with, like a color palette, and then you can choose to use these colors however you see fit. In fact, you can see me do this in some of the early episodes. I think in episode 3 or maybe 4 of ATM 10, where I actually pick out all the blocks that I have easy access to, lay them out on the ground exactly like this, to see how the textures interact and see what looks good and what looks bad, exactly so I can use them how I see fit. As for building actual buildings like I have in Moni Factory, which I am getting back to at some point, just been busy, I have a entire Pinterest boards full of Victorian era architecture that I'm using as inspiration. In fact, I quite clearly mentioned in the video that I have an architectural drawing up right now. I'll see if I can find the screenshot of that drawing. If you can find a building you want to build, imagine it at scale. For example, you know that your person is one doorway tall. And then you have a somewhat of a loose reference to what doorways in real life look like. So if you have a building with a doorway in it, you can imagine how tall you would be standing in that doorway. And then build around yourself. That's how I would do it. Of course, there's multiple other ways to do it, and I'm not even the best builder out there, so my advice must be taken with a grain of salt. I would like to add though, building tips and tricks wouldn't be complete without frame blocks, and if I am to go in a shaded area here, because this world has no day and night cycle, I can put down a few frame blocks to show you guys something you might not know. A frame block can be right-clicked with a piece of glowstone to turn it into a light. And then you can texture that light any color you see fit. And this is a trick I use in multiple places, for example railings and places where I want to hide a light. You can have a edge molding, for example in your ceiling, that is completely built out of one of these blocks. And then have lights in your ceilings that nobody can really see. It'll add an illuminated effect to your build that you kind of don't have visible lights for. It's pretty cool in my opinion, and yeah, use all of these blocks as you see fit. Saruko asks, how I pick color palettes? What's my thought process? Do textures influence the decision? Is scalability taken into consideration or not? Well, have no fear, because I sort of just covered that a few minutes ago. However, since you talked about textures, I want to point out something. I, in my Automods 10 world, was originally going to use white concrete as a base layer for my floor. But if you look at white concrete, it's really easy to forget what you're looking at. In fact, if my base looked like this, I'd say it would look extremely boring against these white machines. You always want to have some sort of primary color. In my ATM 10 is that happens to be polished calcite, so white with a little bit of texture in it. In fact, I should put some down right now. Yeah, there we go. See how much more different that is? Even though it's still just a flat white, there's a little subtle amount of variation in the texture that white concrete just misses. And that sort of helps you even stuff out. And then obviously you're going to want some other pop of color in your base, otherwise, again, it looks extremely bland. Unless that is the aesthetic you're going for. If you're going for a sign slab aesthetic, then most sign slabs are just flat white tile spaces, so that's your decision to make. But let's say I wanted an orange pillar going up the sides. Well, then I would imagine I would want another orange pillar going up the other two sides. Well, it goes in the middle. Let's just say this is one of my controller rooms, right? So we go make up 4x3 of these, and then let's just imitate this on the other side, because I don't know. This is just an example anyways. Now I've ended up in a little bit of a sticky situation here, where if I am to put an accent color down, let's just say this orange wool to, highlight the orange terracotta and be slightly different from it. Well, not only is the orange terracotta in the back there completely hidden, if I am to just put this here, this wall looks awfully flat. So an important thing to keep in mind is to always add a little bit of depth to your builds. And I guess I can use frame blocks right now. I'm going to be using some of these panel blocks because they're effectively vertical half slabs. So if I just put them down like so, and put my orange wool in the back there, you can already see that this little step creates a tiny little bit of shadow right there. And that sort of pulls your eyes into the corner. Let's just do the same treatment over here, shall we? There we are. So much nicer. Now you have this tiny little bit of detail that you would have missed out in the past. And if I do want to pull this blue, which complements the orange, I guess that's a happy coincidence. Blue and orange happen to be complementary colors. If I do want to pull blue, I would not put it in the walls anymore because the walls are already chosen to be orange. I would put the blue down here. And what blue would I use? I guess the blue terracotta, because it's a nice plain color. And I'll explain why in a second. This looks passable, and again, this is extremely reminiscent of the build style I'm using in Automods 10. Now, it would get a little bit silly if I were to use blue glazed terracotta instead of this purple terracotta here, because, well, let's just see what happens. It's blue terracotta. This is a mess. This texture repeats way too many times, and is a lot of visual noise in a place where you wouldn't expect it. You would want this to be clean so that your eyes are drawn to the more textured thing that is the important thing in your build, which happens to be the machines. Not the floor, not the ceiling, unless you have a centerpiece in your ceiling like I do. Yeah, this is where textures come into play. You want your textures to be plain, and you want to draw the user's eye or the viewer's eye to what you want to show them. In this case, I want to show you guys the wireless connectors, so everything else sort of directs you towards this. I hope that makes sense. Please feel free to ask more questions in the comments down below, and while you're headed there, maybe walk on by the subscribe button, consider pressing it, because I will be answering more of these questions in the future. However, with this round of questions and answers out of the way, I'm gonna have to wrap this video up right here. A special thanks goes to all of my patrons who've kept me company and sort of funded my little impromptu break from content creation over the past couple of weeks. I can't explain how busy I am, but hey, maybe the lack of videos is a little bit of proof. I'll be back at some point, maybe day after tomorrow. I'll see you then. Peace out, everybody.